Hello everyone, this is Too Spooky for You coming at you with 3 mansion horror stories. Number 1. True story about a weird abandoned mansion. By Reddit user Frankenpoop. So this is a true story and I only have about 30 minutes to write it before I have to get to work, so if I make any grammatical errors, please forgive me. In the town where I grew up, there was a house that had been abandoned in the mid-80s. It was huge and used to belong to someone of importance in the 30s or 40s and then was inherited by his daughter. She up and left one day and left behind all of her family's items in the house. I didn't hear about the house until around 2012, after I had moved into an apartment of my own in the same town. Here's an important detail. Before I moved, the search for an apartment was so important to me that I had even dreamed about it. I remember a dream where I had already moved. I was in a large room, standing on a wooden square suspended from the ceiling. Looking up, I could see into the attic. I remember loving it and thinking, wow, I live here? When I woke up, I forgot all about it and moved on with my life. Anyway, a few months after I moved, I had some friends over and they told me about the abandoned house. They told me about the times they had snuck inside through an open area and how strange things happened to them. 2 of them described feeling pain in their legs in a certain part of the house without any injuries. Some had seen a dog that vanished. One girl said that when she and a group of her friends went into the house, they tried contacting a spirit, and all of a sudden, they heard an old organ playing in the attic. Their stories went on, weird things appearing in the mirror, weird dreams after visiting, footsteps. So, as I'm sure many of you would, I was dying to go. I was pumped up and ready. I had always wanted to see a ghost or experience at least something paranormal. My friends were ready and willing, and I couldn't have been more excited. We went to a convenience store and bought 8 flashlights, 2 for each of us. I still remember the adrenaline rush of walking to the house. Seeing it emerge before us, it was so big and beautiful, and we all felt it was such a shame that it had gone to waste. Approaching the opening, which was around the back and led to the basement, we all got nervous. None of us were religious, but we decided to join hands and pray anyway. One by one, the 4 of us went in. It was the afternoon, around 3 p.m., so there was still plenty of daylight. We made our way through the basement, and it was very dark and cold, despite the fact that it was summer. It was full of items, nooks and crannies, and small openings. There were plenty of places where you would expect to see a body or a ghost. Simply put, it was straight out of a horror movie, and I loved it. We found nothing scary in the basement, though, so we went up to the first floor. There were many rooms. I never counted them, but probably around 10, with 2 kitchens. We sat in one of them and listened. At first there was nothing, so I urged my friends that we should try contacting the spirit. "If there is anyone here, please give us a knock like this." And she knocked on the hardwood floor once. We waited probably about 10-15 seconds when above us we heard a single knock. "Could that just be a coincidence?" I whispered to her. "Can you do that again for us?" "If there's anyone here, please knock twice like this," she said, and knocked twice on the floor. We listened. Again from above. We all looked at each other and listened some more without a word. "Can you tell us something else?" the same friend asked. "Are you a man?" "Knock once for yes." We waited. "Guys, what if there's a person in here?" I whispered. Again we hushed and listened for a long time. I remember feeling very scared. After what seemed like several minutes, we heard footsteps from upstairs. They didn't seem to lead anywhere, though, and they just were very random. I clutched one of my friends, and the more scared we got, the more intense the footsteps became. We think it was feeding off of our energy. You might think we're crazy, but we decided to go upstairs. Again, many rooms, but these seemed less scary. We passed about 3 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms, and we entered a large room. There was a square suspended from the ceiling, and a square hole that looked into the attic. Although I didn't remember it at the time, I eventually realized it was just like in my dream. We looked at it, wondering how it was used, before we moved on to another room. One friend entered the next room, and then another friend behind her. As the friend that was walking in front of me was about to enter, the door slammed fiercely in her face, sending all of us into a panic. We all knew that none of us had touched that door. We bolted out of there as if our lives depended on it, and we went back to my place to discuss what had happened. But we couldn't stay away. Over and over again we went in there in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, all hours of the day. Surprisingly, nothing happened at night, even at 3 a.m. All of the ghost activity happened during the day. We grew obsessed, buying Ouija boards and pendulums in an attempt to communicate. We dreamed about it. I dreamed about it more than I admitted. One of the girls had a dream about the owner of the house threatening to kill us if we ever went back, which, of course, we did. We explored every corner of it, but anything of importance was long stolen, and all that was left was dusty furniture, old photographs, typewriters, telephones. The beds were still there, chairs, and so on. The organ was still in the attic, although in very bad shape. Pressing the keys only provided out-of-tune and haunting notes. There was a bedroom on the second floor where each of us felt sexual energy. Some of the girls even said they had done sexual things there with unlikely partners, even though they weren't attracted to them. They were just there with that person, and it happened. I eventually moved out of my apartment sometime later and into a different town for a year. The dreams continued, though, for months after that. They were all pleasant dreams, such as me living in the house and having it nicely decorated. All the dreams made me long for it, but one day they just stopped. I stopped thinking about the house and went on with my life. I was visiting my hometown again and drove past where the house was, only to find that it was gone and had been gone for a few months, around the same time that my dreams had stopped. I don't know what happened there, but it still fascinates me to this day. Story number 2, Summer Wind and My Father, by Reddit user Free Range Humans. Quick disclaimer, this is a story that my father has told me since I was a child. While I cannot attest to the story being 100% true, my father is a reputable man, and as his son, it is fairly easy for me to tell when he is kidding and when he is not. Furthermore, the location of the story can be further investigated by Googling Summerland. Here's the story. My father and I have always been close. When I was a child, he would tell me ghost stories that would scare the absolute shit out of me, but deep down, I would always know he was kidding, as there would be some minor detail or theme that would completely discredit the story. He even told me the Blair Witch story and passed it off as his own, only for me to see the movie later in life and realize my dad is one hell of a plagiarist. But aside from all the stories that were clearly made up, there was one that stuck with me well into my adult life, which is probably the reason why I remembered it so well enough to confront him on it a few weeks ago. When I finally did, he sat down with me and explained what happened in detail. My dad has always had a wicked sense of humor and is an absolute awful liar, but this time I could sense something was different. I will paraphrase what he told me as best as I can. My father was born in 1958 and raised in a well-to-do town on the cusp of Chicago suburbs. Like many people in the area, his family owned a cabin on the lake in the far northern Wisconsin area. For those of you who have not traveled that far north, it feels incredibly remote for the United States. There wasn't cell phone service until 2007, and you're more likely to see a bear crossing the road than a person. And it gets so dark at night you can't see your palm in front of your face. My memories of North Woods, Wisconsin start at about 1994, and to me, you couldn't get any more remote than that. For comparison, the story that I'm about to tell you takes place in 1981. My father, in the summer between his senior year of college and his freshman year of law school in 1981, bartended at a very well-regarded supper club in Vilas County, Wisconsin. One night after a long shift, my dad and 4 of his coworkers, including one of their dogs, decided to pile on my dad's truck and drive to this allegedly haunted mansion that was a few miles down the road, buried deep down in the evergreen forest that is northern Wisconsin. The mansion has changed ownership a handful of times, all for reasons stemming from the obvious. The mansion was called Summerland in its day, and I encourage you to research it on the internet. It has been visited by paranormal tourists and even featured on a TV show. But this visit that my father and his friends took was well before any of that. According to my dad, they rolled up on the mansion just after midnight, as the supper club had closed for the night. They all piled out of my dad's Jeep with flashlights and shined them up at the old ghostly building. As they approached the house, my dad's friend Scott, who owned the dog they brought, stopped to complain that his dog wouldn't move. As the group turned around to address the complaint, they noticed that Scott's dog hadn't followed them. It simply hopped back into the Jeep, where it stayed, sitting in the driver's seat. Annoyed, Scott attempted to grab the dog and bring it closer to the house, but the dog started whimpering and yelping as he brought it closer. Now, I know this sounds like the typical cliche dog won't go into the haunted house story, but my dad was dead serious. Eventually, Scott left the dog in the Jeep and they all went into the house. My dad said that generally their haunted house tour was pretty much non-eventful until the end. They did receive a bit of a scare when they heard a loud crash coming from the first floor down into the basement, but much to their displeasure, it was one of my dad's drunk coworkers who had thrown an old toilet down the stairs in an attempt to be funny or scary. The group spent about 15 minutes just wandering around the place, looking at all the old abandoned furniture that the previous owners had left. A year or two later, my father and my mother, who were dating at the time, now happily married for over 20 years, snowmobiled back to the abandoned mansion with my uncle and his wife. If you've ever been that far north, you can probably relate to how cold and desolate it gets during the winter months. When they arrived, my dad and my uncle dismounted while their significant others stayed on the snowmobiles. As they approached the mansion, as my father tells it, an uncanny feeling came over them. Something just wasn't right. At that moment, my father looked up to the second floor and saw the dusty old curtains move. A white, stoic, ghostly face appeared in the window, and for a brief moment looked into my father's eyes, then moved the curtains back to their original position. Needless to say, my father and my uncle trudged back to their snowmobiles and rode back to their cabin as quickly as they could. They never returned to Summerland after that night. In the late 1980s, the old mansion burnt to the ground, and it was determined that the fire was caused by a lightning strike, although no one truly knows. You can still go see what remains of the house, as it is alleged that the spirits still haunt the premises. I know that this isn't nearly as scary as some of the other ghost stories on this subreddit, but I feel it is worth sharing only because of the eerie history that surrounds the mansion. If you ever get bored and find yourself searching for a good scare, as I've said before, just Google Summerland. Story number 3, A Night at the DeLorean Mansion, by Reddit user Gregory Picari. I'm sure most people have heard of the DeLorean sports car made famous in the Back to the Future movies. The car itself, while very futuristic, was considered a flop sales-wise, and by 1985, when the first movie came out, the company had already been shut down by the creditors. John DeLorean personally called the filmmakers to thank them for immortalizing the car in the film. If they hadn't, his name would likely have long since faded from history. DeLorean always had issues with money, and by the late 90s, he was thoroughly broke. He officially declared bankruptcy in 1999, which began foreclosure proceedings on his beloved residence in Bedminster, New Jersey. The sprawling estate encompassed hundreds of acres of beautiful rolling hills and featured sculpture gardens, European-style fountains, and a grandiose Georgian mansion. This is where I come in. The estate was purchased at auction for $15.25 million, with the intention of turning it into a golf course and country club. I happen to know someone whose parents were involved in the deal and were acting as caretakers of the estate while the sale was finalized. Somehow the parents were convinced by their children to let the kids throw a New Year's Eve party in the mansion while it was still vacant. I arrived with a group of friends in the early evening as the mansion's foreboding facade set a stark silhouette against the fading sunset. The main group of people were drinking and carrying on in the dining hall for most of the night, and I was bored, so I decided to explore the house a little. The place had more rooms than you could count, with a domed library in the very imposing Gothic style, and scores of bedrooms tucked away down labyrinth hallways. There was one part of the house that I seemed mysteriously drawn to, what amounted to little more than a pantry near the servants' quarters. That section of the house had a very strange, unsettling quality, and the noise of revelers downstairs did little to assuage the dark loneliness of the place. It was simply a rectangular room with some built-in shelves, nothing really noteworthy. However, once I stepped inside, I was flooded with emotions both inexplicable and frightening. It was a mixture of anger, depression, regret, and longing. I quickly left and shut the door. Right outside was a small nook with a window overlooking the front lawn of the house. I got the unshakable impression that someone once had sat there for many hours staring out this window. Eventually, I rejoined the party downstairs and forgot about the room. Shortly thereafter, someone chimed in, "Hey, Dave is passed out. Let's put him in the haunted pantry." I was then brought up to speed on the alleged episode in the house's history in which a servant had taken their life in that very room. A clearly inebriated Dave was carried up into the pantry, placed on the floor, and the door was closed. Almost immediately, we heard screams and banging coming from inside, and we were nearly trampled by Dave as he burst out the door. He ran downstairs yelling, "Dude, something touched me." As we were laughing at him, the door abruptly shut on its own. I felt a chill permeate my bones as the group scattered trying to cover up their fright with laughter. The rest of the party proved uneventful, but we all avoided this section of the house with the pantry like the plague. In the morning after, packing up, my curiosity got the better of me, and I walked past the pantry again. The door was slightly ajar, even though no one had been to that section of the house since last night. I got the chills again and quickly made my way back downstairs. As we got in the car and were pulling away, I got the distinct urge to look up at the window near the pantry. "Don't do it," my cautious side said, and I listened. The mansion became the main clubhouse to what is now the Trump National Golf Club and has been extensively remodeled. However, I sometimes wonder what might still be living in that pantry, just watching. I would like to thank you all for listening to my narrations. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, and if you would like to hear more narrations in the future, remember to subscribe and click the bell in order to be notified of the next time I upload. I really enjoy making these videos, and I'm learning as I go, so they may be a bit rough around the edges right now, but they will only get better. If you have any suggestions on how I can make these videos better, or any stories you would like to hear me narrate in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below.